Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the In Conversation podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about all things Disney with the editors of our brand new journal, the International Journal of Disney Studies. Rebecca, Robyn, welcome to the podcast. It's wonderful to have you on.
Thanks so much for having us, James.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here today. And might I start by asking you each where you're based, where you're calling in from and what institution you're working at. Robyn, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently calling in from Surrey in the UK, which is about an hour from London. And I'm a lecturer in media and communications here in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey.
And I'm calling from Texas, United States. I'm at the Texas A&M University Commerce. I'm assistant professor of children's literature. And I do want to give a small shout out because A&M Commerce is partially funding the journal. So just really appreciative of their support of our journal so far.
Yeah, no, thanks very much to the institution for their financial support of the journal. Well, you're both based an ocean apart. So how did you actually meet? How did you begin this partnership?
It was actually just one of the few beautiful things that came out of the pandemic. Wow. When all the conferences went online, Robyn and I were attending a lot of the same online conferences. I heard her talking about her waves of princesses, and I was fascinated, and I was like, I must meet this person. And I think that's when I first messaged you.
Yeah, and then I distinctly remember we were at the Northeast Popular Culture Association conference, and Becca had just done a fascinating presentation on live action adaptations and remakes with Disney, which has now been published. So congrats, Rebecca. And yeah, I remember just watching the presentation and being like, oh, this is fascinating. And then we started talking about live actions and how, my work was intersecting with Rebecca's work. And then it just kind of went from there, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, and while to follow on from that answer, Robyn, could you just tell me a little bit like, what's the fascination with Disney? What first drew you personally to, the sort of Disney Media Corporation in all of its trappings, and why you started studying the subject?
Yeah, so I'm a Disney kid. Like, I was introduced to Disney from, I don't even know. Like, I don't remember a life without Disney. Apparently, I always asked my mum, I was like, what was the first like Disney interaction? And she was like, oh, it's when you were like under 2, your granddad like sat you down and you watched Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs because that was his favorite film. And so Disney's been part of my life since from I can remember, and I was obsessed with Disney princesses. I wanted all the merch and all of that kind of stuff. Loved Disney princesses specifically. And so I'd kind of just always been a Disney fan. But then when it came to like the scholarly stuff, I hadn't really thought about it. My first degree was politics. And so I was in my second year starting to think about my dissertation, and I'd already kind of like thought about, right, okay, I'm going to do something on like international relations. And I'd already kind of like set it all out. And then Frozen came out that year, and I went to see it with my boyfriend, now husband, my very own Disney prince, so to speak. And shout out to Matt for always supporting me. So thank you for that. And yeah, we went to see Frozen. And I remember just watching it and being absolutely enthralled. I was like, this is so different to the Disney princess films that I've seen before. And then I thought, wouldn't it be so interesting to like see what that looked like over time? I wonder if anyone's done that. And I headed straight to Google Scholar, and that's when I found all of the literature on Disney princesses. And that was it. From there, I'm now here.
Well, before I hand over to Rebecca, can I just ask, do you remember what the first thing you wrote on Disney was, or perhaps your first published piece? Was it on princesses, or did you?
It was.
Okay.
Yeah. It was. So my first published piece was, it was co-written with a colleague of mine from my PhD, and we wrote about how Moana is representative of kind of guiding stories as part of ecofeminism.
Oh, very cool. And Rebecca, what about yourself? What drew you to Disney, as you know, as a corporate entity and as a field of study? And perhaps you could also just tell us a little bit about the field of Disney studies for the uninitiated, for anyone who's not familiar. Like, what are the kinds of topics people, you know, kind of tend to write about? But first of all, tell us your own personal journey.
So very much like Robyn, I grew up with Disney. I don't remember a time before Disney. I think this is a product of us both growing up in the 90s. My family loves Disney. They tell me they didn't love Disney before my parents had me and like started watching Disney with me, but I don't remember that, right? Like we were all into Disney my entire life. My dad still loves, like, his favorite thing, favorite kind of movie is anything animated, specifically Disney and Pixar. We go to the parks together. Like, it's just always been a really a huge touchstone for my family. When I got to college, I discovered that you could study children's literature, and I was very excited about that. And I kind of focused on fairy tales, and now I can realize that I focused on fairy tales because of Disney. At the time, I didn't put that connection together. I was just like, fairy tales are fun. So I started focusing on fairy tales, and then looking at fairy tale retellings. Eventually, I migrated to adaptation studies.
Okay.
And with adaptation studies, I ended up, like, all of the adaptations I was looking at were Disney. And that's kind of how I found myself moving more and more squarely into Disney studies. My first publication was about the adaptation of Into the Woods from the stage play into the Disney film. And so it was my first publication and my first Disney publication. And I think all of my publications but one have some kind of relationship to Disney in some way. And that was before I decided that I was a Disney person, and just Disney has always been a huge thing for me. Disney studies is a very, very broad field. We're international, we're interdisciplinary. I mean, obviously Robyn is political science degree, working in a sociology department, teaching communication. So she's representing a bunch of the different disciplines. I'm in the literature and languages department here, but I focus on English and literature. So what Disney studies really is anybody, anywhere who is talking about Disney in any way. And Disney, you know, people often think of the Disney princesses and all of Disney's adaptations, right? Like that is often what people think of first, but Disney owns so much of especially the American mediascape, but really, you know, the global mediascape these days. So anybody working on media has probably touched something Disney at some point. And there's obviously Marvel and Lucasfilm and the parks and Nat Geo and the apps and Hulu and all of these things. So there's a million different things, and Disney studies is really just about studying that. There are a few themes that come up in a lot of the scholarship. One is how Disney represents specific identities. Race and gender have been two of the most popular identities, but we're seeing more work in ability and age. In madness studies is also becoming more prevalent in Disney studies as well. There's a lot of studies on how Disney works as a business and a corporation, and there's a lot on fan studies and specifically thinking about the parks and tourism. So those are some of the areas that get a lot of love, but Disney studies covers so much different ideas and topics and disciplines.
Well, thank you both for those initial answers. I find it quite heartwarming that your fandom of Disney and your own academic careers are so entwined. And I think, you know, it also, being a child of the 90s myself, as it were, it's obviously ever present, but like it's kind of really interesting how it's developed as a academic study and a very much an interdisciplinary international one. So thank you again, Rebecca, for just showcasing the wealth and depth of topics that can be covered under the broad field of Disney studies. And let's not just forget, you know, like Star Wars and Marvel alone obviously are very ripe for review and for research. So yeah, so this journal can certainly be the home for many scholars writing on many different topics across the mediascape. But it's not just a journal, is it really, the International Journal of Disney Studies, because it's kind of affiliated with DisNet. Robyn, I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us a little bit about the DisNet project, the association, the conference, and the things that are affiliated with that, because I think anyone who's interested in this journal is probably going to want to, you know, find a welcome home at DisNet too.
Yeah, of course. So DisNet it's short for the Disney Culture and Society Research Network, and it's a research network that was launched, so to speak, in June 2022. So DisNet is nearly 2 years old now, and she's my baby. Okay, so here's a fun fact, and I'm not actually sure whether I've ever actually told anyone this. So here is like the fun,
the exclusive.
Here is the tea, everyone. So I originally created DisNet for a number of reasons. I noticed I felt often quite lonely during my PhD because I was coming from a politics background, and obviously no one else in politics that I could find was working on Disney. And it felt quite hard to like find people. Like, you knew that other people existed, but you didn't necessarily know like where they were, and sometimes you wouldn't even find them because they're just kind of like hidden in these different like pockets of fields and disciplines, right? So sometimes it felt quite kind of like hard to find people, and it was easier to find people over Twitter, or X as it is now known. And I remember thinking to myself, we need a space where we can all easily find each other, like that goes beyond Twitter, because not everyone's on Twitter. Like, I want us to have like some kind of space where we can all easily find each other. But then I remember thinking, okay, but how would I even do this? Like, I'm going to need so many like resources to do this. So I applied for some funding to do it, and I got rejected from such funding. And then I sat there in the most typical Robyn way, and I can only say this because I know myself, but I just thought, okay, well, I'll just do it myself then. and I did. So I created a website, and I organized a launch event. I did a soft launch, and kind of like started teasing things. I created like a Twitter account. I started like following people. I did like a, you know, something's coming kind of page to kind of like tease it. I spoke to the PCA Disney Studies chairs, because that was the first year that the Disney Studies area was being launched at PCA. And I said, hey, listen, here's what I'm going to do. Can I like live tweet the stuff that's going on? Would you mind like giving me a shout out? They were so gracious. They were like, yes, of course. They've been very supportive in kind of like the founding elements of DisNet. So did that, told everyone about the launch event. A lot of people showed up to the launch event, which was wild. And that's when the website launched, and we just grew and grew and grew and grew. And that's basically how it started. And after that, it was 2023. And that was obviously the year of the Disney 100 celebrations for their anniversary. And so I thought, let's do a conference. And I'm very chaotic in that way, James, like, and Rebecca will be able to support this. Like, sometimes I'll just sit there and go, we should do this, like, and we'll just make it happen, like, because let's just do it. And so DisNet was very much about creating a very inclusive and interdisciplinary space where scholars from all over the world, from all disciplines, can come together and discuss, but also collaborate on Disney studies research. Mm-hmm. We are aiming to constantly highlight the amazing cutting edge research that is being done by Disney scholars, share conference information, publishing, funding opportunities, provide support, provide mentorship, provide even just sometimes a venting space. for scholars. And we do that through a wide range of events, mentoring programs, work in progress events, and of course now the conference. And our second conference is happening at the end of June, so very soon.
Well, kind of interesting that the DisNet is it's all pretty much like online though, right, in terms of the conference.
Yes.
which is really interesting because of course a lot of associations were founded before the pandemic,
Indeed.
and then of course they were physical events held at universities or conference centers, etc., various sizes, and then they went virtual and everyone was like, this doesn't work for us, etc. But with DisNet, it's got this really again another heartwarming story really, that it was founded to create community at a time of of trial and tribulation, like through the pandemic. And it's wonderful that you actually continue to keep it in that format, but then to grow it, obviously through the journal, through having more events, and then of course through connections at the Popular Culture Association and various other conferences where I know you both have a strong presence, and other members of the editorial team and board are of course involved very much at the highest levels of the area chairs and things like that. So that's really kind of cool that it was founded, and a real positive to come out of that pandemic again. But also it's obviously this is a real moment because the Disney celebrated its centenary. Then you have the foundation of DisNet. You have the Popular Culture Association, which is obviously a huge North American but international association. They take Disney to have its own area, which is obviously a big move for a major institution like that. So you have all these things happening at the same time. Intellect's published several books over the last few years as well. So all of this culminates, and then you come to us with this proposal for this new Journal of Disney Studies. So you must have realized the time was right. Let's talk a little bit about that journal then. So I wanted to ask, maybe Rebecca, you can take this one. What's the kind of the key aims and scopes of the journal, and what kind of papers are you interested in? You've mentioned obviously that the field of Disney studies is very interdisciplinary, very international. So if you could just maybe tell us what the aims and scope of the journal are, what it will cover, and who might be interested in submitting to it.
Yeah. So we are interested in anything that is about Disney, anything that is exploring any aspect of Disney, whether that's Disney the person or Disney the company, any of its holdings, anything it owns. Really, we're pretty open to anything related to Disney. But we do focus on that interdisciplinary angle. So Robyn and I come from very different disciplines that write differently, right? Which is fun when we're trying to collaborate on writing. So we do take our articles that are written in very different styles. We don't try to kind of systemize that, because we want to emphasize the interdisciplinary nature of our journal. So as long as it's related to Disney, it is fair game for the journal. And the idea there really is trying to get us to talk across disciplines, because there's a lot of times where I'll be working in children's lit and adaptation studies, whatever, talking about I don't know, gender, because obviously that's something Robyn and I are both really invested in. But Robyn's working on gender in communication and sociology, right? And so we want to build bridges across all these disciplinary boundaries so we can kind of push forward Disney studies, and stop making the same arguments in different vacuums, but instead of bringing everyone together so we can actually make new knowledge.
I've got to say, I think that's one of the things that really excited me about the prospect of publishing this journal, and why it's going to be so important, is that Disney has obviously long been discussed by all different kinds of disciplines and theorists from all over the place. Whether it be film studies, fandom, costuming, business studies, marketing, merchandising, design, the list goes on, right? But this is really kind of like the first opportunity, I think, to truly encase the whole field, and to bring all these different voices together. So I think you've got a big responsibility and really an exciting opportunity as well. And I know that through the team you've developed, and because of the way that you're describing and positioning the publication, I think you're putting yourself in a great position to achieve that. But just to be clear, so someone might be writing a qualitative or quantitative piece. Someone might have all this data on like theme parks or on merchandising or on, you know, how many people watch this princess movie versus this one. So it could be like very data driven. It could also be kind of sociological. It could be anthropological, whatever. You could have something on music, musicology, theme tunes or something like that. So it really could be anything. And you're really interested in those gray areas and those intersections and interdisciplinarity.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that this interdisciplinary approach does allow us to do is we're getting pieces that aren't just from different disciplines, but that cross disciplines within each article itself, right? So the journal really is interdisciplinary in as many ways as we can get it to be.
Well, Robyn, let me bring you in here too. When can we expect the first issue, and what can we expect from it? Are there any, you know, any teaser trailers, any exciting, you know, articles that might be there, or any themes, anything like that? What can we expect from this first issue, and let us know when people will be able to access it?
Yeah, of course. So we are looking at publication in early 2025, which is very exciting. We're currently under the various peer review processes that are happening right now. So in terms of how it's going to be structured, we have 3 different types of publication within the journal itself. So we have original articles, and like you were saying, we are very welcoming of all forms of knowledge. So whether it's empirically based, whether it's theoretical, it's a combination, quants, qual, mixed. If you're like me and you're a facet methodologist, a bit of that, like anything, we're very interested in all these different kinds of approaches and how that can basically be discussed in original articles. But we also have our book reviews of recent books that have been published, and we have a commentary section which is focusing on, it's more of a short form writing, so it's not as long as an original article, but it's where scholars are able to engage with maybe, you know, a film that's recently come out, a new ride at a park, or something new that's happening with Disney as a company, or any of its kind of like wider intellectual properties that can be engaged with in more of a shorter form way. And I suppose I will give you a little tidbit, but I don't want to give away too much, because you know, you've got to subscribe to the journal and read it to find out all of this amazing stuff that's happening. But I can't tell you it's good. But Rebecca and I are in the process of writing our kind of like first introduction. And it is going to be very much focused on kind of like an introduction to Disney studies, and kind of looking at all of these amazing and different seminal works that have been happening across all sorts of different fields in all sorts of different countries, to kind of show the breadth and depth of Disney studies as a field.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, and talking about methodologies and things like that, are there any special issues on the horizon? Any themes that maybe people could expect over the first year or two?
So our first special issue will be in 2026. And again, we just want to give a teaser trailer. We don't want to give away too much right now, but for that special issue, we are partnering with a pop culture association from Australia to work on that and bring in some non-US and non-UK like special editors, and it's going to be really, really great. Beyond that, we are planning other special issues. There's a lot of different topics that we want to touch on, but some of the ones that we want to deal with earlier rather than later is methodologies in Disney studies. As we've been saying, there's so many different ways to approach it. So just really thinking about how do we methodologically approach Disney studies. And we also want to do something with fans, and specifically looking at fans of color and how race impacts Disney fandom. So those are some of the topics that are hopefully coming down the line.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. I should mention here as well is that the first issue will be freely available to anyone. and that will be free to access via the Intellect Discover platform, intellectdiscover.com. Check that out. Or again, you can directly check it out via the www.intellectbooks.com. Just search for Disney Studies, and the journal has its own page there. What you can find there is the aims and scopes, not quite as eloquently put as Rebecca, of course, but yeah, a lot of information about what the journal is interested in, how to submit, the call for papers, general, and then also special themed issues will be posted there as well. So keep an eye out. You can, of course, sign up to newsletters for announcements and all that stuff. And you can, of course, reach out to Rebecca and Robyn directly if you have specific questions. You can submit directly through the website, through a portal, and there's a tracking system. So all proper, legit, and very timely, and all the efficient and effective and all the rest of it. So if you are interested in submitting, www.intellectbooks.com. I want to find out more, same thing. And that first issue will be available for free when it's published, early 2025. So do keep an eye out, do keep an eye out on the social media as well. And we'll be, making announcements as things become more formalized and as we get closer to the launch event. There's also a number of other bits and pieces that will be happening around the journal, such as this podcast. And of course, there's interviews and things like that, and a bunch of other teaser trailers that will be coming between now and when we publish that first issue. So yeah, do check that out. You also there, Rebecca, you did just mention some issues around kind of equity and accessibility. Would you talk a little bit about your processes and practices around equity and accessibility and how you've kind of approached these tricky topics?
Yeah, thank you, James, for that question. I'm going to have Robyn jump in for some of this because this is something that we're both passionate about, and we've developed a lot of different things for the journal in consultation with our associate editors. And I do want to say our associate editors have been doing such great work, and it's not just Robyn and I working on this journal. We really do have a great team that we've built. So, one of the things we've been doing for equity's sake has to do with our actual structure, our editorial structure. So we have Robyn and I as editors. Originally, we did research and we looked at all these other journals and how they, set up their associate editors, and they usually would have like a book review editor and an EDI editor, equity, diversity, and inclusion. They'd have, the commentary editor. So that's what we set up, right? We had 2 editors for each to share the workload, but we had, a structure. And then in one of our early meetings with our associate editors, the idea was suggested that in doing so, we're really kind of shunting EDI off to the side. That's their problem. It's not our problem, right? So we restructured it. We now have a pool of associate editors, and we're trying to move EDI into the center of everything we do. And also just sharing the workload. So we have specific people who are kind of like, we go to you first for book reviews, but we all share the work across the team to get things done and make sure that we can take care of each other as we're doing it. So that's one thing that we implemented. Another thing we're really excited about, Robyn and I do sensitivity reads at pretty much every stage of the process. So the first thing that happens when we get an article is we do a read through, and we're checking for, if it matches the aims and scopes of the journal, but we're also checking to make sure that there's not any problems with, like with racism or sexism within the article itself. And so we do that check, and if anything needs to be corrected, we, talk to the author and correct it at that point. And then we send it off to reviewers, or if it's, such a huge problem, it might get rejected at that stage. But we send it off to reviewers, and the reviewers send us reviews back. And we also sensitivity check those, right? Because we want to protect our authors. And we think that's really, really important, especially because if we're having someone submit who is a relatively early career researcher, we don't want to scare them away from Disney Studies with one bad review. To help that issue, we did training with all of our editorial board who serve as our reviewers, kind of talking about this is what we want to do with the review. It's supposed to be constructive feedback. And so just talking about ways to do so ethically and kindly. so that we can help our reviewers, because often we're thrown into a review without ever being trained how to do it. So we wanted to make sure that everyone understood what they needed to do, but also to protect our authors. So that's one of the things that Robyn and I are both very passionate about, is making sure that we're protecting everybody in the process, right? As much as we can. So Robyn, do you want to talk about the equitable submission system?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I just wanted to add before I talk about the ESS is, I think something that I've really learned in this process is that all of us have much unlearning to do. Like, it's not just about learning, it's also about unlearning things that you've been taught and have kind of almost been ingrained in you, and kind of recognizing that. And actually, you know, sometimes it can be very hard when you know, the spaces that you have been working in, and even kind of like wider spaces in field, in academia more widely, when things have always been done in a particular way, and you almost get used to that, right? You do, oh, well, this is just how it's done. And then, you know, so I remember when we were suggesting the structure, and then, you know, we talked about it as a team, and members of the team were like, but we don't have to do it like that. And I was like, oh yeah, we don't. Wild. Like, and it's just been, for me personally and professionally, it's been such a fantastic experience that for me it's gone beyond the journal. Like, it's impacted every single aspect of my life in unlearning so many things that you just kind of been taught, and it had been ingrained within you that, you know, this is just how it's done. And then actually it was like, oh, actually we don't have to do anything like this. We can completely like tear it up and start anew. And, you know, there are many journals that are also, you know, doing elements of what we do. You know, we're not necessarily the first journal that's, you know, like doing all of this at once, but it's something that I think it's a real privilege to be able to start a journal from scratch and build it from the bottom up. And actually, I just want to say to Intellect, like, thank you for giving us the space to do that. And, you know, encouraging us and supporting us. And, you know, when we go, hey, we're thinking about doing this, what do you think? And you're kind of like, yeah, like, we'll check these various things to make sure it's okay. But then, yeah, you know, let's do it. Let's try it. Like, let's see how this goes. And I think that's incredibly important, because learning EDI, I think, is something, it's always going to be a lifelong thing, but actually in tandem with that, it's unlearning the things that have almost kind of like been ingrained within you from these like wider structures. And so that actually leads me on nicely to kind of talk about something that I'd seen done in other journals, which in other journals, it's been called like the early career researcher submission kind of like pathway, right? So, and it was one of my first journal article that was ever submitted was published through an early career kind of like pathway, which is essentially kind of like a structure where before you actually submit your article and it gets sent off to peer review, you submit it kind of like before that. An editor reads it, provides you with some feedback, and then you get to work on it, and then you send it in, and then they send it out for peer review. So it's like an extra layer of peer review, especially for people who, you know, it might be their first article, for example. So that's something that we really wanted to do. And we started out with, you know, I was like, right, early career researcher submission, great, okay. And again, here's the fantastic thing about unlearning as well as learning is that when we were all together as associate editors, people were like, but it goes beyond early career research, right? Like it could be, why don't we call it equitable support submission? Because in that instance, we're not just covering people who are early career researchers, we're covering anyone who feels that they may need more support when they are submitting an article. And that's been a really joyous thing. And we've already had some ESS submissions, which has been absolutely fantastic. And it's been really great as editors to be able to kind of like work with people and kind of like, build their work up. It's especially great when you can see an idea and you're like, yes, this is going to be something. It just needs like a little bit more time to kind of like develop and grow. And I think for so often in academia as a space, sometimes it can really feel like, oh, well, you know, you submit it once, and if we don't think that you're going to be able to like get it sorted within X amount of time, then we're just going to reject it. And it's like, but do we actually have to do that? Like, can we just give those people a little bit more time, a little bit more support? Because actually it would still be a really cool thing to include in the journal. And so, yes, our ESS submission system is open. It's basically the exact same as how James was talking about in terms of submitting your article. When you go through the portal, you'll have basically an option to select that you want to go through the equitable support submission system as opposed to just original article. And yeah, it's something that I'm really proud of that we've done.
Great. No, well, I thank you both for going into a bit more detail about some of those processes and some of the decisions that you've made along the way. It sounds to me like the journal is really exciting in terms of the structure as well as the content that you'll be pursuing. So great to hear about it, and I can't wait to see the first issue come to fruition. So again, everyone, www.intellectbooks.com, Disney Studies. Take a look. All the information you'll ever need will be there, and that's where the free issue will be published when that first issue reaches the general populace. But I think it's time for a few quick time questions. So if you're game, let me ask you a couple of these. I'm going to start with you, Rebecca. So why did you become an academic?
I've known for a very long time that I wanted to teach, and when I got into high school, I'm like, can't do it. So at that point, I was like, I'm going to do college because teenagers are not where I'm at. And so, yeah, it's always been about teaching for me. The research is fun, but it's being in the classroom and working with these students. It's one of the reasons why I love the ESS route, is because it's working with those, especially the ones that I've had have been grad students. And so getting to work with these, burgeoning scholars in such a close way has been really lovely.
Oh, thank you. And how about you, Robyn?
Yeah, that's such a hard question.
Hey, we don't mince our words around here.
No, I love it. Okay, I think so. When I first started out at university, I didn't even know what academia was. Like, I was the first person in my family to go to university. I was the first person in my family to get a degree, and certainly I was the first person in my family to then go on and like get a PhD and become an academic. So I didn't know what academia was like. So when I kind of like discovered it through doing my my undergraduate dissertation on Disney princesses, and basically the joke is that I loved it so much I didn't want to stop, and that's kind of how I've ended up in academia. Like, I just loved researching the Disney princesses so much that like I just didn't want to stop doing it. And I remember having this conversation with my dissertation supervisor, who then became my PhD supervisor and is now a lifelong mentor and one of the biggest inspirations I have. And I was like, I don't want to stop. I love it. And she went, Robyn, what if I told you that you don't have to? And I was like, so that's how I ended up like doing a PhD. And then as I was doing it, and I was thinking, oh gosh, yeah, I think I want to be an academic. This is amazing. And I think I just did it because I fell in love with it, I suppose.
I mean, some academics even get a contract and a salary,
Yeah.
Not all, unfortunately, but that's a different discussion. Oh, well, all right, Robyn, let me ask you another one then, because you talked about your mentor there, and it's interesting. I always like to ask people, what piece of advice do you wish you were given when you first embarked on your career as an academic? And that could be anything, but yeah, what advice would you wish you'd been given?
I'm actually going to steal something from Robyn, because this is something she tells me all of the time, and I wish I had started hearing it earlier, which is, there is no such thing as an academic emergency.
That's a good point. That's actually one my wife says the same thing about publishing. She's also a publisher, I should add. But books are like one of the most important things, but it's unlikely that anyone's going to die as a result of a late copy edit or a misplaced Oxford comma. But that isn't to say that we don't take things very seriously. But I think that is a good way of approaching life as an academic.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, if there's like a welfare issue, like that's an emergency, right? But like in many instances, I think there can sometimes be such a huge sense of urgency. And then it's like, okay, but is it urgent?
There's a lot of pressure, isn't there, as well,
Right? Like, is I'm thinking about the surgeons.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'm thinking about, making like
Yeah.
life-changing decisions for people and things like that. And that's not to say that what we do isn't important, but I suppose that kind of like leads into maybe the advice that I would want to give is that actually the most important person is you, and you should learn to take care of yourself, because actually if you take care of yourself, then you can continue for a very long time doing the things that you love to do. If you don't take care of yourself, it can lead to burnout, it can lead to poor health, it can lead to all sorts of these things. However, I want to caveat this by saying that actually, like, this is all happening within much wider structures beyond academia that do not always enable people to prioritize their well-being. So in many instances, it's very easy for us to kind of like sit there and go, yes, just prioritize you and things like that, because it doesn't always feel like that. And like I have felt, especially going through my PhD, and kind of like precarity and things like that, it doesn't feel like that, because you have to pay bills, you have to put food on the table and all of these kinds of things. So sometimes it can really feel like you're constantly in a race. And so I think caveating, the concept of taking care of yourself within it is more of like giving yourself grace, like you are doing your best. And sometimes that's all you can do, especially in kind of like much wider structures that are so much beyond your control. So actually, I think for me, my advice is going to be find your community, find your people, because my life is so much easier because I have my community as a support network. And I think so for me, I think it's find your community.
Well, I wish I'd had both these pieces of that advice, but at any point in my life or career, I think. Thank you guys. Very, very, very good advice there. Thank you. So I wanted to ask a little bit about the influences on your work as well. And Rebecca, I'll start with you. Any theorists who you go back to, you're constantly referencing, or who have had a major impact on your own work?
Yes, so probably several, but the one that I work with most closely all of the time is Mara Gubar. She is a children's literature scholar, and she has this theory of like models of childhood and how there's different kinds of childhood. And specifically, she advocates for the kinship model. And since a lot of my research is about how childhood looks different in different texts, and especially as you adapt text, how childhood changes, her work has been a huge influence on me.
Oh. Great. Well, I advise everyone to go check that out. New to me, so looking forward to checking some of that out myself. And Robyn?
So I think for me, it is Jennifer Mason. She's a sociologist, and she, with colleagues at the time Manchester, formulated a new methodological approach called facet methodology, which is how we conceptualize really complex social phenomena through a gemstone, to kind of acknowledge that there are actually lots of different sides to complex phenomenons, and we can actually use different methods and different creative ways of exploring how different these different facets are, but also how they interact and how they might kind of like shine a brighter light in some areas and others. And that was a really huge inspiration for me for my PhD. It's what I based my methodological approach on for the Disney princess phenomenon. And it's really a part of every single piece of work that I do. It's all building on these different facets.
Okay, thank you. I always love asking those questions because I often am not familiar with the theory or thinker, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and broaden my horizons here a little bit. So thank you both for sharing those. That's wonderful. Well, here's a good question, or potentially a tricky one. I'll make it a little easier by not making you pick one, but tell me some of your favorite Disney films or stories. Rebecca, over to you.
So I have several. Lilo and Stitch, Up, Princess and the Frog, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Brave, which I know is a Pixar, so is Up. Anyway, yeah, I think those are my favorites.
Oh, that's cool. There's a few there that, you know, maybe not everyone's seen or, cool. Okay. That's great to hear. And Robyn, yourself, you got any particular favorites?
Can I go across Disney's intellectual properties?
Yeah. I think, well, anything that the journal is okay with me.
Perfect. Okay. The Princess Diaries. Fun fact, I always watch the Princess Diaries when I want a bit of a confidence boost. So I remember the night before my PhD Viva, I watched the Princess Diaries and then the Princess Diaries 2, the Royal Engagement. So both of those for sure. Frozen 2. I think Frozen 2 is better than the first. I'm going to say it. And that's the hill that I will die on. Like that is my strong belief, and I would argue it in an academic way too. So Frozen 2 for sure. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
And then, oh, it's so hard, but I do have a real soft spot for Atlantis, the Lost Empire. I'm in love with Kida to the point where I named my golden retriever after her because she's one of my favorite Disney princesses.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you both for sharing those personal anecdotes. I really appreciate it. And maybe there's a few films there that people maybe haven't seen, maybe want to go and, you know, take a look at. And again, I'm glad you put in Empire Strikes Back because that does show again the whole horizons there. Also, probably my favorite Star Wars movie. Again, I don't know if I want to die on that hill, but you know, but nevertheless. Okay, well, thanks for that, guys. How about your favorite character or story to write about, academically speaking? Rebecca.
If we're still staying focused kind of in the Disney realm, it's definitely Sleeping Beauty. I've been working on Sleeping Beauty since I was an undergrad, and every so often I come back to it. So I've written on the 1957 film, both Maleficents, so 2014 and 2019. I don't even like the fairy tale. Like the two fairy tales I work with most are Little Red Riding Hood and Sleeping Beauty, and I don't like either of them. But I love working with them, and I will probably continue to do so in the future.
Brilliant.
I think I'm going to say Kida from Atlantis, the Lost Empire, because I think she's a real standout from the third wave of princesses that I talk about. And she's also, in a way, an anomaly because she does differ from both Pocahontas and Mulan. I kind of argue that in the third wave, there is still that desire for the romantic relationship, even though they're introducing all of these different traits of like leadership and negotiation and communication and assertiveness. But then it almost feels at the end for Pocahontas and Mulan, and let's be clear, like there is real significant issues in many instances that have been, you know, discussed by scholars on both of those films due to kind of, you know, romanticizing colonialism, kind of fabricating various things. But at the end of both their stories, they're kind of, it's a lot of post-feminist inspiration, right? Because it's almost like, okay, so it's great that you've, you know, developed all of this, but now here's the relationship, and now you get to choose. You get to choose whether you have your man or you can go and have your leadership, but you can't have both. You have to pick one. And what I loved about Kida was that it was never even a question as to whether she was going to leave Atlantis with Milo and go back to America, or whether she was going to stay in Atlantis and be the queen. Like, she was queen. That was it. It was Milo that had to make the choice. And actually what I found very interesting about that is that Milo, at the very beginning of that film, the whole kind of point of this is that Milo believes that Atlantis exists, and he's an academic and he's trying to get money. Aren't we all?
Sure.
He's trying to get funding to prove that Atlantis exists, and no one is giving him funding. And he's almost like a laughing stock. And then he finds Atlantis. And at this point, he could go back to those people and go, ha, I found it. And he doesn't. Like, he's presented with that choice, but he doesn't. He stays with Kida. But I thought it was so refreshing that it wasn't even a question whether she's going to make that choice, but she's not an official franchise Disney princess.
Well, again, if it's okay with the editors of the journal, it's okay with me. So, but I think you kind of like almost tangentially raised an important point here as well, and I think it's come across through our conversation today as a whole. But obviously, this journal is interested in celebrating the whole Disney universe, and we are looking at all these different topics and intertextual approaches, all these different methodologies. But this in no way is going to shy away from any of the difficult topics and conversations that surround Disney, because there are a multitude. And of course, we want all different voices from all across the world to come and contribute to that conversation, criticism, as well as celebration. So, just to be really clear about that. And of course, everything will be going through this very robust peer review process as well, which I thank you both for explaining in detail today. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you both on the In Conversation podcast. Thank you both very much for your time and for these great answers. Cannot wait to read that first issue, and it's such an exciting time for Disney studies. I'm really glad that we have, we've put our flag in the sand at Intellect, and effectively really glad to be taking on this project and working with you guys and your broader team. So everyone watch this space, and of course everybody check out www.intellectbooks.com, where we'll be posting that free issue as soon as it's available too. But just as a final question from me, other than perhaps Disney, is there anything else that either of you are working on or you would like to just highlight today as a final thought? Rebecca?
Yeah, so I'm working on my first monograph right now. It is contracted with Edinburgh University Press. Wow, did not want to come out. It's called Adapting American Adulthood, and I'm looking at how adults get adapted from children's literature to children's media. And I have a whole chapter on Disney, and like Disney also shows up in like 3 other chapters, but I have a whole chapter dedicated to Disney in that one.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and good luck with that project.
Thank you.
Robyn, how about yourself? Anything going on?
Yes, so I was successful in winning a grant from the British Academy and Leverhulme Small Grants fellowship process grant thing, and my project is about the Disney princesses and consumer meaning making of the Disney princess phenomenon. So as a facet methodologist, I'm now kind of like building on the facets, and I've kind of looked at films, I've looked at merchandise, I've looked at consumer experiences, and now I'm looking at audiences. So it's a life course study about how people of different age groups interact and engage with the Disney princess phenomenon in its various faceted ways. So I have just finished my data collection. I am in the process of writing up a journal article, and I will be doing some really cool kind of like public engagement events, and hopefully kind of like building on the research and the creative methods that I used.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both. And on that note, I think we'll call it a day. So thanks again for all your time and for your answers today. Cannot wait for the International Journal of Disney Studies to be published in 2025.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.